Russian grammar encompasses a highly inflectional morphology, a syntax that, for the literary language, is the conscious fusion of three elements: a Church Slavonic inheritance, a Western European style, a polished vernacular foundation. The Russian language has preserved an Indo-European inflectional structure, although considerable adaptation has taken place. The spoken language has been influenced by the literary one, but it continues to preserve some characteristic forms. Russian dialects show various non-standard grammatical features, some of which are archaisms or descendants of old forms discarded by the literary language. Note: in the discussion below, various terms are used in the meaning they have in standard Russian discussions of historical grammar. In particular, aorist, imperfect, etc. are considered verbal tenses rather than aspects, because ancient examples of them are attested for both perfective and imperfective verbs. Nouns, nominal declension is subject to 6 cases: a nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, instrumental, and prepositional in 2 numbers, and absolutely obeying grammatical gender. Up to 10 additional cases are identified in linguistics textbooks, although all of them are either incomplete or degenerate. The most recognized additional cases are locative, partitive, and several forms of vocative. The adjectives, pronouns, and the first 2 cardinal numbers further vary by gender. Old Russian also had a third number, the dual, but has been lost except for its use in the nominative and accusative cases with the numbers 2, 3 and 4. Russian noun cases often replace the usage of prepositions in Indo-European languages. Their usage can be summarized as nominative the subject case, accusative the object case, genitive corresponding to the possessive case or of plus, dative corresponding to plus, instrumental denoting an instrument used in an action, prepositional used with many common prepositions, such as in, on, etc. There are no definite or indefinite articles in the Russian language. The sense of a noun is determined from the context in which it appears. That said, there are some means of expressing whether a noun is definite or indefinite. They are: the use of a direct object in the genitive instead of the accusative in negation signifies that the noun is indefinite. Compare th 1/2 th micron th squared th paragraph n florin th 1/2 th cubed th, and th 1/2 th micron th squared th paragraph n florin th 1/2 th cubed n florin. The use of the numeral 1 sometimes signifies that the noun is indefinite, for example ti 3/4 nth micron th 1/4 n florin ion on nth degree th 3/4 ith cubed th 3/4 th degree nth degree th squared n on euro th micron I nth 3/4 th 1/2 th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 ith n euro n florin ith cubed th degree th n euro th n th 3/4 I n no th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 n euro th I n no. Word order may also be used for this purpose. Compare th 3/4 ith 1/4 th 1/2 th degree n on florin th squared th plus or minus th micron th paragraph th degree ith 1/4 th degree ith no nth and thouth degree ith no nth squared th plus or minus th micron th paragraph th degree ith squared th 3/4 ith 1/4 th 1/2 th degree n on florin. The plural form may signify indefiniteness, th un th 1/4 th 3/4 ith paragraph th micron th n florin th I no nth 3/4 th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th ith 1/2 th degree n, versus th un th 1/4 th 3/4 ith paragraph th micron nth micron th n florin th th I no nin th 3/4 th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th th I th 1/2 th micron. The category of animacy is relevant in Russian nominal and adjectival declension. Specifically, the accusative has two possible forms in many paradigms, depending on the animacy of the referent. For animate referents, the accusative form is generally identical to the genitive form. For inanimate referents, the accusative form is identical to the nominative form. This principle is relevant for masculine singular nouns of the second declension and adjectives, and for all plural paradigms. In the tables below, this behavior is indicated by the abbreviation N or G in the row corresponding to the accusative case. In Russian there are three declensions. The first declension is used for feminine nouns ending with th degree/n and some masculine nouns having the same form as those of feminine gender, such as a th degree ith degree papa or thn uncle. Also there are common gender nouns like th degree thn euro th degree ts which are masculine or feminine depending on the person they refer. The second declension is used for most masculine and neuter nouns. The third declension is used for feminine nouns ending in no. There are also a group of several irregular different declension nouns, consisting of a few neuter nouns ending in th 1/4 n and one masculine noun thn florin and no way. However, these nouns and their forms have sufficient similarity with feminine third declension nouns that some scholars such as Litnevskaya consider them to be non-feminine forms of this declension, as written in the tables below. Nouns ending with th to the first, thn, th micron are written with th instead of th micron in prepositional. nth micron ith 1/2 th micron th squared th 1/2 ith paragraph th 1/2 th micron th 1/4 nth micron ith 1/2 thn euro th micron th streaming, in lower streaming of a river. But if words th squared nth micron th 1/2 th micron and th squared thn euro th 3/4 th 3/4 th paragraph th micron th 1/2 th micron are representing compound preposition meaning while, during the time of, they are written with th micron th squared nth micron ith 1/2 th micron nth degree inth degree in a time of an hour. For nouns ending in no-n, noeth micron, or no-n, using noeth in the prepositional is usually erroneous, but in poetic speech it may be acceptable. th micron n no th micron th 1/2 no th 3/4 th 1/2 th degree ith micron th paragraph th degree ith degree th squared th degree th plus or minus and nuith I. Equals first declension equals feminine nouns with a small set of masculine nouns. Equals second declension, masculine nouns equals masculine nouns. Equals neuter nouns equals third declension equals, the third declension is mostly for feminine nouns with some masculine and neuter. Feminine and some masculine nouns. A small set of neutral nouns. Equals undeclined nouns equals, some nouns are not modified when they change number and case. This appears mostly when their gender appears to have no ending in any declension which suits the final part of the word. Adjectives. A Russian adjective is usually placed before the noun it qualifies, and it agrees with the noun in case, gender, and number. With the exception of a few invariant forms borrowed from other languages, such as th plus or minus th micron th paragraph beige or nth degree th khaki, most adjectives follow one of a small number of regular declension patterns, except for some which provide difficulty in forming the short form. In modern Russian, the short form appears only in the nominative and is used when the adjective is in a predicative role. Formerly short adjectives appeared in all other forms and roles, which are not used in modern language. but are nonetheless understandable to Russian speakers as they are declined exactly like nouns of the corresponding gender. Adjectives may be divided into three general groups. Qualitative denote quality of the object. Only they are usual to have degrees of comparison. Relational denote some sort of relationship. Unlikely to act as a predicate or have a short form. Possessive denote belonging to a specific subject. Have some declensional peculiarities. Adjectival declension equals, the pattern described below suits for full forms of most adjectives, except possessive ones. It is also used for substantivated adjectives as n florin nnth 1/2 and th to the first and for adjectival participles. After a sibilant or velar consonant, th, instead of n, is written. When a masculine adjective ends in th 3/4 th to the first, the th 3/4 th to the first is stressed. After a sibilant consonant, neuter adjectives end in th micron. It is sometimes called the nth 3/4 n th 3/4 nth micron rule. Accusative in the masculine gender and in plural depends on animacy, as for nouns. Instrumental feminine ending th 3/4 th to the first / th micron th to the first has alternative form th 3/4 n / th micron n for all adjectives, which has only stylistical difference. Russian differentiates between hard stem and soft stem adjectives. Note the following: masculine adjectives ending in the nominative in th to the first and neuters in th micron are declined as follows: th micron th cubed th 3/4, th micron th 1/4 n florin, th 1/4, and th micron th 1/4. Feminine adjectives in nn are declined th micron th to the first and nn. Plural adjectives in th micron are declined thn, th 1/4, th 1/4 th and thn. Case endings th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 / th micron th cubed th 3/4 are to be read as th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 / th micron th squared th 3/4. Comparison of adjectives equals, comparison forms are usual only for qualitative adjectives and adverbs. Comparative and superlative synthetic forms are not part of the paradigm of original adjective but are different lexical items, since not all qualitative adjectives have them. A few adjectives have irregular forms which are declined as usual adjectives, th plus or minus th 3/4 th no n th 3/4 th to the first bigger th plus or minus th 3/4 th no n th to the first bigger, nth 3/4 n th 3/4 nth to the first gooder th n florin nth to the first better. Most synthetically derived comparative forms are derived by adding th micron or th micron to the first adjective stem, th n th degree nth 1/2 nth to the first redder th n th degree nth 1/2 th micron more red. These forms are difficult to distinguish from adverbs, and probably they are adverbs. Superlative synthetic forms are derived by adding suffix th micron to the first n, or th degree th to the first n, and additionally sometimes prefix th 1/2 th degree th, or using special comparative form with th 1/2 th degree th 3/4 th plus or minus n nth to the first kinder th 3/4 th plus or minus n th micron th to the first nth to the first the kindest, th plus or minus th 3/4 th no nth 3/4 th. To the first bigger th 1/2 th degree th plus or minus th 3/4 th no nth to the first the biggest. Another way of comparison are analytical forms with adverbs th plus or minus th 3/4 th micron more slash th 1/4 th micron th 1/2 th micron less and nth degree th 1/4 nth to the first most slash th 1/2 th degree th plus or minus th 3/4 th micron most slash th 1/2 th degree th 1/4 th micron th 1/2 th micron least th 3/4 th plus or minus n euro nth. To the first kind a euro th plus or minus th 3/4 th micron th 3/4 th plus or minus n euro nth. To the first kind a euro nth degree th 1/4 nth. To the first th 3/4 th plus or minus n euro nth. To the first the kindest. This way is rarely used if special comparative forms exists. Possessive adjectives Possessive adjectives are used in Russian to a lesser extent than in most other Slavic languages, but are still in use. They answer on the questions nth micron th to the first, an n knoweth, and denote only animated possessors. Pronouns personal pronouns Russian is subject to TV distinction. The respectful form of the singular you is the same as the plural form. It begins with a capital letter, th-un, th degree n, th degree th 1/4 etc. in following situations, personal letters and official papers, and questionnaires, otherwise it begins with minuscule. Compare the distinction between du and ça in German or tu and was in French. When a preposition is used directly before a third-person pronoun, th 1/2 is prefixed, n florin th 1/2 th micron th cubed th 3/4, n th 1/2 th micron n, etc. Because the prepositional case always occurs after a preposition, the third-person prepositional always starts with an th 1/2. Like adjectives and numerals, letter th cubed in genitive and accusative form is pronounced as th squared th micron th cubed th 3/4 slash th 1/2 th micron th cubed th 3/4 th micron th squared th 3/4 slash th 1/2 th micron th squared th 3/4. Demonstrative pronouns possessive adjectives and pronouns unlike English, Russian uses the same form for a possessive adjective and the corresponding possessive pronoun. In Russian grammar they are called possessive pronouns thn euro thn un th paragraph th degree n th micron th knoweth 1/2 n th micron th 1/4 th micron n th 3/4 th 1/4 th micron th 1/2 thn. The following rules apply. Possessive pronouns agree with the noun of the possessed in case, gender, and number. The reflexive pronoun nth squared th 3/4 th to the first is used when the possessor is the subject of a clause, whatever the person, gender, and number of that subject. No non-reflexive exists for the third person, the genitive of the personal pronoun is instead, that is th micron th cubed th 3/4 for a mask. /newt. Sing. Possessor, th micron n for a fem. Sing. Possessor and thn for a plural possessor. But unlike other genitives used with a possessive meaning, in modern Russian these words are usually placed before the object of possession. Example of the difference between reflexive and non-reflexive pronouns, th 1/2 th plus or minus thn th squared th 3/4 th paragraph th micron th 1/2 n florin equals he loves his wife while th 1/2 thn th plus or minus thn th micron th cubed th 3/4 th paragraph th micron th 1/2 n florin equals he loves his wife. Unlike Latin where a similar rule applies for the third person only, Russian accepts using reflexives for all persons, th-un th plus or minus thnin th squared th 3/4 nith paragraph th micron th 1/2 n florin equals I love my wife, th unth plus or minus th ninth micron th plus or minus ni equals I love myself. The ending th micron th cubed th 3/4 is pronounced as th micron th squared th 3/4. The ending th micron th cubed th 3/4 is pronounced as th micron th squared th 3/4 I. Equals interrogative pronouns equals, the ending unregistered trademark unregistered trademark th micron th cubed th 3/4 unregistered trademark unregistered trademark is pronounced as unregistered trademark th micron th squared th 3/4 unregistered trademark unregistered trademark. Numerals. Russian has several classes of numerals: cardinal, ordinal, collective, and also fractional constructions. Also it has other types of words, relative to numbers, collective adverbial forms, multiplicative and counting system adjectives, some numeric pronominal and indefinite quantity words. Here are the numerals from 0 to 10. Equals declension of cardinals and fractions equals. Verbs. Grammatical conjugation is subject to 3 persons in 2 numbers and 2 simple tenses, with periphrastic forms for the future and subjunctive, as well as imperative forms and present past participles, distinguished by adjectival and adverbial usage. Verbs and participles can be reflexive, that is have reflexive suffix nn/no appended after ending. An interesting feature is that the past tense is actually made to agree in gender with the subject, for it is the participle in an originally periphrastic perfect formed with a present of th plus or minus and no, bte squared, to be, which is now omitted except for rare archaic effect, usually in set phrases. The participle nature of past tense forms is exposed also in that they often have extra suffix vowel which is absent in present future. The same vowel appears in infinitive form which is considered by few scholars not to be verbal but in which verbs appear in most dictionaries, nth 3/4 th and no to walk nth 3/4 th, he, walked nth 3/4 th paragraph n florin I walk. Verbal inflection today is considerably simpler than in Old Russian. The ancient aorist, imperfect, and pluperfect have been lost, though the aorist sporadically occurs in secular literature as late as the second half of the 18th century, and survives as an odd form in direct narration, recategorized as a usage of the imperative. The loss of 3 of the former 6 tenses has been offset by the development, as in other Slavic languages, of verbal aspect. Most verbs come in pairs, one with imperfective or continuous, the other with perfective or completed aspect, usually formed with a prefix, but occasionally using a different root. For example, nth degree no, spade squared is imperfective. Th 3/4 nth degree no, pay spade squared is perfective. The present tense of the verb th plus or minus and no is today normally used only in the third-person singular form th micron n and no, which is often used for all the persons and numbers. As late as the 19th century, the full conjugation, which today is extremely archaic, was somewhat more natural. Forms occur in the Synodal Bible, in Dostoevsky and in the Bolinas or oral folk epics, which were transcribed at that time. The paradigm shows as well as anything else the Indo-European affinity of Russian. Infinitive equals, the infinitive in Russian has the suffix no or nth, or ends with no. It is the basic form of a verb for most purposes of study. Present future tense equals. N florin/n florin n, th degree n is used after a hard consonant or th paragraph, n per mil or n. Otherwise n/nn, nn is used. A mutating final consonant may entail a change in the ending, th micron becomes n when stressed. There are 2 forms used to conjugate the present tense of imperfective verbs and the future tense of perfective verbs. The first conjugation is used in verb stems ending in a consonant, n florin, or th 3/4, in th degree not preceded by a hush. The second conjugation involves verb stems ending in th or th micron, in th degree preceded by a hush, example th 3/4 thn euro th 3/4 nth and no euro th 3/4 thn euro th 3/4 nn florin, th 3/4 thn euro th 3/4 nnn, pay and registered trademark pre say squared it squared, pay and registered trademark pre. EU, pay pros squared et. Examples. Equals past tense equals, the Russian past tense is gender specific, a euro th for masculine singular subjects, a euro th degree for feminine singular subjects, a euro th 3/4 for neuter singular subjects, and a euro th for plural subjects. This gender specificity applies to all persons. Thus, to say I slept, a male speaker would say nnth degree th, while a female speaker would say nnth degree tha. Examples. Exceptions. Equals moods equals, Russian verbs can form three moods, indicative, conditional and imperative. Imperative mood. The imperative mood second person singular is formed from future present base of most verbs by adding th, no or th to the first. Plural second person form is made by adding nth micron to singular one, th cubed th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 n euro n I speak th cubed th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 n euro th cubed th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 n euro th micron, th degree th plus or minus n florin th n florin I shall forget th degree th plus or minus n florin th no, th degree th plus or minus n florin th nth micron, th micron ni. Glue th micron th to the first th micron th to the first nth micron. Some verbs have first-person plural imperative form with nth micron added to similar simple future or present tense form, th 3/4 th to the first th nth 1/4 nth micron. Let us go. There are other ways of expressing command in Russian. For third person, for example, thn florin n and no particle with future can be used, thin florin n and no th 3/4 th 1/2 th degree th 1/4 th 3/4 th nth degree n. Let them shut up. Conditional mood. The conditional mood in Russian is formed by adding the particle th plus or minus n after the word which marks the supposed subject into a sentence formed like in the past tense. Thus, to say I would sleep, or I would like to sleep, a male speaker would say nnth degree th plus or minus n, while a female speaker would say nnth degree th plus or minus n. Equals verbs of motion equals, verbs of motion are a distinct class of verbs found in several Slavic languages. Due to the extensive semantic information they contain, Russian verbs of motion pose difficulties for non-native learners at all levels of study. Unfixed verbs of motion, which are all imperfective, divide into pairs based on the direction of the movement. As opposed to a verb-framed language, in which path is encoded in the verb, but manner of motion typically is expressed with complements, Russian is a satellite language, meaning that these concepts are encoded in both the root of the verb and the particles associated with it, satellites. Thus, the roots of motion verbs convey the lexical information of manner of movement, for example walking, crawling, running, whereas prefixes denote path, for example motion in and out of space. The roots also distinguish between means of conveyance, for example by transport or by a near euro unregistered trademark s own power, and, in transitive verbs, the object or person being transported. The information below provides an outline of the formation and basic usage of unfixed and prefixed verbs of motion. Unfixed verbs of motion. This table contains 14 commonly accepted pairs of Russian verbs of motion, adapted from Muravayova. Directionality. Unidirectional perfectives with type, the addition of the prefix th 3/4 to a unidirectional verb of motion makes the verb perfective, denoting the beginning of a movement, that is setting out. These perfectives imply that the agent has not yet returned at the moment of speech, for example. Going versus taking, 3 pairs of motion verbs generally refer to a taking a unregistered trademark, a letting a unregistered trademark with additional lexical information on manner of motion and object of transport encoded in the verb stem. These are th1/2 th micron nth/th1/2 th 3/4 nth and no, th squared th micron nth/th squared th 3/4 th and no, and th squared th micron th nth/th squared th 3/4 th and no. See below for the specific information on manner and object of transport. Prefixed verbs of motion. Verbs of motion combine with prefixes to form new aspectual pairs, which lose the distinction of directionality, but gain spatial or temporal meanings. The unidirectional verb serves as the base for the perfective, and the multidirectional as the base for the imperfective. In addition to the meanings conveyed by the prefix and the simplex motion verb, prepositional phrases also contribute to the expression of path in Russian. Thus, it is important to consider the whole verb phrase when examining verbs of motion. In some verbs of motion, adding a prefix requires a different stem shape. See below for a table the prefixes, their primary meanings, and the prepositions that accompany them, adapted from Muravyova. Several examples are taken directly or modified from Muravyova. Idiomatic uses equals. The uni- and multidirectional distinction rarely figures into the metaphorical and idiomatic use of motion verbs, because such phrases typically call for one or the other verb. See below for examples. Adjectival participle Russian adjectival participles can be active or passive. Have perfective or imperfective mood. Imperfective participles can have present or past tense, while perfective ones in classical language can be only past. As adjectives, they are declined by case, number and gender. If adjectival participles are derived from reciprocal verbs, they have suffix -n appended after the adjectival ending. This suffix in participles never takes the short form. Participles are often difficult to distinguish from deverbal adjectives. Active present participle, th paragraph th squared n florin in permel th micron th squared nin th 3/4 th 1/4 th cubed th 3/4 in euro th 3/4 th micron th 3/4 in th micron th 1/2 no th 3/4 ith plus or minus n euro n th micron th 3/4 n th squared th micron in on n th squared th micron th 1/2 th 1/2 n th micro a euro. The people living in this city are very kind and responsible. In order to form the active present participle you should replace the n of the 3 RDPs. Pl. Of the present tense by n per mil, and add a necessary adjective ending. Note: only imperfective verbs can have an active present participle. Note: these forms are obsolete in modern Russian and they aren't used in the spoken language as forms of the verb to be. Active present participle declension equals reflexive verbs paradigm equals, the participle agrees in gender, case and number with the word it refers to. th 3/4 n th squared n per mil th degree in on florin th micron in th 1/2 n th ni th n th 1/4 th paragraph th squared n florin in per mil th 1/4 th squared th 1/2 th degree in th micron th 1/4 th cubed th 3/4 in euro th 3/4 th micro a euro I. Dedicate this song to the people living in our city. th cubed th 3/4 n euro th paragraph n florin in no th n th knoweth 1/4 thi. th paragraph th squared n florin in per mil th 1/4 th squared th 1/2 th degree in th micron th 1/4 th cubed th 3/4 in euro th 3/4 th micro a euro unregistered trademark. I'm proud of the people living in our city. Active past participle. Active past participle is used in order to indicate actions that happened in the past. Th micron ith squared n florin nth degree, nth degree ith squared nth degree n florin nth 1/2 ith cubed n florin, th degree th plus or minus an eth degree nth squared th 3/4 th to the first nth micron th micron nth 3/4 ith 1/2 euro. The girl that read this book here forgot her phone. Compare th micron ith squared n florin nth degree, nth degree inn per mil th degree n florin nth 1/2 th cubed n florin, a euro th 1/4 th 3/4 nth micron n euro th degree ia euro. The girl reading this book here is my sister. In order to form the active past participle, you should replace the infinitive ending "-no" by the suffix th squared n and add an adjective ending. Active past participle declension reflexive verbs paradigm passive present participle th 3/4 th plus or minus n florin th paragraph th degree and no euro. To discuss th 3/4 th plus or minus n florin th paragraph th degree ith micron th 1/4 nth to the first euro being discussed. In order to form the passive present participle euro unregistered trademark as necessary to add an adjective ending to the 1st plural of the present tense. These participles are hardly ever used in modern Russian. Normally, they are replaced by reflexive active present participles, a euro thn florin inn per mil th to the first nn a euro unregistered trademark instead of a euro thn florin ith micron th 1/4 nth to the first a euro unregistered trademark. A euro being drawable. A euro th 1/4 th 3/4 inn per mil th to the first nn a euro unregistered trademark instead of a euro th 1/4 th 3/4 ith micron th 1/4 nth to the first a euro unregistered trademark. A euro being washed. The forms ending in a euro th 3/4 th 1/4 nth to the first a euro unregistered trademark are mostly obsolete. Only the forms a euro th squared th micron th 3/4 ith 1/4 nth to the first a euro unregistered trademark and a euro th nth 3/4 ith 1/4 nth to the first a euro unregistered trademark are used in spoken language as adjectives. Th squared th micron th 3/4 ith 1/4 nth to the first nth micron th 3/4 th squared th micron ith a euro a slave man, th nth 3/4 ith 1/4 th degree n. Th squared th micron th nth 1/2 th degree ia euro. The unknown quantity. Passive past participle nth micron ith degree and no a euro to do to make nth micron th degree ith 1/2 th 1/2 nth to the first a euro done made. Passive past participles are formed by means of the suffixes a euro th 1/2 th 1/2 a euro unregistered trademark or a euro n a euro unregistered trademark from the infinitive stem of perfective verbs. Besides that, this kind of participle can have short forms formed by means of the suffixes a euro th 1/2 a euro unregistered trademark or a euro n a euro unregistered trademark. Adverbial participle Adverbial participles are not declined, quite like usual adverbs. They inherit the aspect of their verb. Imperfective ones are usually present, while perfective ones can be only past. Almost all Russian adverbial participles are active. To form passive constructions, adverbial participle forms of verb th plus or minus and no may be used with either adjectival participle in instrumental case, or short adjective and nominative. Present adverbial participles are formed by adding suffix th degree /n to present tense stem. Few of past participles are formed in similar manner. Most past adverbial participles are formed with suffix th squared, some with stem ending on consonant a euro with nth. Reciprocal ones have suffix "no" at their very end. Adverbial participles in Standard Russian are believed to be feature of bookish speech. In colloquial language they are usually replaced with single adjectival participles or constructions with verbs, tie 3/4 th 3/4 th plus or minus th micron th degree th squared, nth 3/4 nth cubed n florin th n no a th 3/4 th 3/4 th plus or minus th micron th degree th 3/4 nth cubed n florin th n no. But in some dialects adverbial and adjectival participles are common to produce perfect forms which are not distinguished in literary Russian. For example, I haven't eaten today will be th nth micron th cubed th 3/4 th 1/2 nth 1/2 th micron th squared nth instead of th nth micron th cubed th 3/4 th 1/2 nth 1/2 th micron th degree. Equals irregular verbs equals 1. These verbs all have a stem change. 2. These verbs are palatalized in certain cases, namely NAN for all the present forms of TH, TH and TH degree INO, and TH a TH paragraph in the first person singular of the other verbs. 3. These verbs do not conform to either the first or second conjugations. Equals passive voice equals. Word formation. Russian has on hand a set of prefixes, prepositional and adverbial in nature, as well as diminutive, augmentative, and frequentative suffixes and infixes. All of these can be stacked one upon the other, to produce multiple derivatives of a given word. Participles and other inflectional forms may also have a special connotation. For example, Russian has also proven friendly to agglutinative compounds. As an extreme case, purists frown on such words. But here is the name of a street in St. Petersburg. Some linguists have suggested that Russian agglutination stems from Church Slavonic. In the 20th century, abbreviated components appeared in the compound. Syntax. The basic word order, both in conversation and the written language, is subjecta verb object in transitive clauses, and free word order in intransitive clauses. However, because the relations are marked by inflection, considerable latitude in word order is allowed even in transitive clauses, and all the permutations can be used. For example, the words in the phrase nth 3/4 nth th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 can be arranged th 3/4 nth th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 th 3/4 nth tie 3/4 nth squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 tie 3/4 nth squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 n th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 n th 3/4 nth th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 th 3/4 nth n. While maintaining grammatical correctness. Note, however, that the order of the phrase th squared th 1/4 th degree th cubed th degree th 1/2 is kept constant. The word order can express the logical stress, and the degree of definiteness. Primary emphasis tends to be initial, with a slightly weaker emphasis at the end. Note that some of these arrangements can describe present actions, not only past. Impersonal sentences equals, Russian is null subject language it allows constructing sentences without subject. Some of them are disputed not to be really impersonal but to have oblique subject. One of possible classification of such sentences distinguishes subjectless impersonals, such ones where no element could pretend to be a subject, th 1/4 th micron n euro th degree th 3/4 n no. It got dusky. th through 3/4 n th squared th micron th 3/4 th 1/2 th 3/4 n no. It's midnight in Moscow. They contain an impersonal verb. Dative impersonals usually express personal feelings, where experience so in dative case can possibly be considered as subject, through 1/2 th micron dat. nth n florin nth 1/2 th 3/4. I'm bored. Other impersonals, they have nominal element which is neither nominative nor dative, but also is a nominal verb argument, through micron th 1/2 n ac. nth 3/4 nth 1/2 thn. I feel sick. th degree n ac thn on euro th 1/2 n florin th 3/4 nth 3/4 th 3/4 th 1/4 instr Vaya had an electrical shock. Equals negation equals. Multiple negatives, unlike in standard English, multiple negatives are compulsory in Russian, as in th 1/2 thn th 3/4 th 1/2 th 3/4 th cubed th degree th 1/2 th 3/4 th 1/4 n florin th 1/2 thn th micron th cubed th 3/4 th 1/2 th micron thn euro th 3/4 n permel th degree th micron n. Ni squared ek to ni squared eke cent dar ni squared eke mu ni squared ete. Evo ni squared e pre eejt. Usually, only one word in a sentence has negative particle or prefix th 1/2 th micron, or belongs to negative word th 1/2 th micron n, while another words have negation affirmative particle or prefix th 1/2 th. But this word can often be easily omitted, and thus th 1/2 th becomes the signal of negation, th squared th 3/4 thn euro n florin th cubed th 1/2 th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 th 1/2 th micron n and th squared th 3/4 thn euro n florin th cubed th 1/2 th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 both mean there is nobody around. Adverbial answers, as a one-word answer to an affirmative sentence, yes translates th degree and no does th 1/2 th micron n, as shown by the table below. There is no simple rule for giving an adverbial answer to a negative sentence. Bekomri says that in Russian answer th degree or th 1/2 th micron n is determined not so much by the negative form of the question as by the questioner's intent of using negation, or whether the response is in agreement with his presupposition. In many cases that means that adverbial answers should be extended for avoiding ambiguity. In spoken language, intonation of saying th 1/2 th micron n can also be significant on if it is affirmation of negation or negation of negation. Note that while expressing an affirmation of negation by extending th degree with a negated verb is grammatically acceptable, in practice it is more common to answer th 1/2 th micron n, and subsequently extend with a negated verb paralleling the usage in English. Also, when answering a negative sentence with a non-extended th 1/2 th micron n it is usually interpreted as an affirmation of negation again in a way similar to English. Alternatively, both positive and negative simple questions easily can be answered by simply repeating the predicate with or without th 1/2 th micron, especially if th degree / th 1/2 th micron n is ambiguous. In the latest example, th micron n euro th paragraph n florin n no. Or th micron n euro th paragraph n florin n no. Equals coordination equals. The most common types of coordination expressed by compound sentences in Russian are conjoining, oppositional, and separative. Additionally, the Russian grammar considers comparative, complemental, and clarifying. Other flavors of the meanings may also be distinguished. Conjoining coordinations are formed with the help of the conjunctions th degree, th 1/2 th. th 1/2 th, nth degree th paragraph th micron, nth 3/4 th paragraph th micron. Most commonly the conjoining coordination expresses enumeration, simultaneity or immediate sequence. They may also have a cause-effect flavor. Oppositional coordinations are formed with the help of the oppositional conjunctions th degree, th 1/2 th 3/4, th degree, th 3/4 th 1/2 th degree th 3/4, th degree nth 3/4, th paragraph th micron, etc. They express the semantic relations of opposition, comparison, incompatibility, restriction, or compensation. Separative coordinations are formed with the help of the separative conjunctions th plus or minus th 3/4, th nth 3/4, nth 3/4, etc., and are used to express alternation or incompatibility of things expressed in the coordinated sentences. Complemental and clarifying coordination expresses additional, but not subordinated, information related to the first sentence. Comparative coordination is a semantical flavor of the oppositional one. Common coordinating conjunctions include th, I, and, enumerative, complemental. Th degree, a, and, comparative, tending to, but. Th 1/2 th 3/4, no, but, oppositional. Th plus or minus th 3/4, EIB and registered trademark for, clarifying. The distinction between th and th degree is important. Th implies a following complemental state that does not oppose the antecedent. Th implies a following state that acts in opposition to the antecedent, but more weakly than th 1/2 th 3/4, but. The distinction between th and th degree developed after medieval times. Originally, th and th degree were closer in meaning. The unpunctuated ending of the Song of Igor illustrates the potential confusion. The final 5 words in modern spelling, th 1/2 nth no nth 1/4 nth degree th squared th degree n euro n florin th paragraph th 1/2 th micron th degree th 1/4 th 1/2 no, KNE squared Z squared jam E slave unregistered trademark E unregistered trademark Jew E ni squared E me squared ein squared can be understood either as glory to the princes and to their host. Amen. Or glory to the princes, and amen to their troops. Although the majority opinion is definitely with the first interpretation, there is no full consensus. The psychological difference between the two is quite obvious. Equals subordination equals, complementizers include, th micron nth, e.g. squared la squared e, if. th 3/4 nth 3/4 th 1/4 n florin n nth 3/4, pay unregistered trademark tee mu ete unregistered trademark, nth degree th degree th, tar cac because, nth 3/4 th plus or minus n, e tobe, th degree th plus or minus n, e dab a so that, th 3/4 nth micron nth 3/4 th cubed th 3/4, th degree th, e pos squared la squared ete voc unregistered trademark k, after, nth 3/4 n un, xete. Squared o, although, in general, there are fewer subordinate clauses than in English, because the participles and adverbial participles often take the place of a relative pronoun-verb combination. For example, equals absolute construction equals, despite the inflectional nature of Russian, there is no equivalent in the modern language to the English nominative absolute or the Latin ablative absolute construction. The old language had an absolute construction, with the noun put into the dative. Like so many other archaisms, it is retained in Church Slavonic. Among the last known examples in literary Russian occurs in Radishkov's Journey from Petersburg to Moscow, 1790, THN florin N permil N florin TH1 quarter TH1 half TH micron THN euro TH3 quarters TH squared TH degree TH1 half N TH degree TH1 quarter N on TH1 quarter TH3 quarters TH micron TH to the first TH1 half TH micron TH squared N on TH3 quarters TH degree. E jedu E permil MN squared E Z squared J drove unregistered trademark ni squared E permil T unregistered trademark EZ me say squared la squared me jej ni squared E vax E de squared E unregistered trademark. As I was leaving Idrovo village, I could not stop thinking about Anouta. See also, list of Russian language topics, reduplication in the Russian language. Notes. References. External links, interactive online reference Grammar of Russian, Wikibooks Russian, Grammar.ru, dictionaries. Wiktionary has word entries in Cyrillic with meanings and grammatical analysis in English. Russian Wiktionary gives word meanings and grammatical analysis in Russian. Russian grammar overview with practice tests. Over 400 links to Russian grammar articles around the net. Free online Russian grammar book.